Hey guys, Jaden here, and for Black History Month, I wanted to do another true crime video, but a podcast this time, about a really harrowing murder case from the 1960s that I've been looking at for months. Today's story is the murder of Carol Jenkins. Now, to most people, if you hear the name Carol Jenkins, it might not ring a bell, but if you grew up in Martinsville, Indiana in the 60s, then I'm sure you've heard that name, because her unsolved murder case haunted the town for decades. And it took about 30 plus years before they found the killer. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So Carol Marie Jenkins was born in 1947 in Franklin, Indiana, to her mother Elizabeth and her father. Now, while she was still a baby, her parents got divorced, and she never knew much of her dad. But it wasn't a problem because her mom raised her all by herself with no problems. And when Carol was little, her mom met a new man named Paul Davis. Now, Paul and Elizabeth got married, and he raised Carol as his own daughter. Now, she did meet her biological dad when she was a teenager, but she always referred to Paul as her dad. And Paul and Elizabeth went on to have 5 more kids. Now, Carol grew up in Rushville, Indiana, which was a predominantly white town in the 60s, but it wasn't a really racist town. It was more of a small, close-knit community, so they didn't care what race you were. Like, they were more accepting than some of these other cities, especially given Indiana's racist past. When Carol was a teenager, she attended Rushville High School and wanted to move to Chicago to be a model. She wanted to be a model and decided that she should move to a bigger city like Chicago. But it wasn't going to be that easy, and it would take some work. So come 1965, when she graduated, she decided to stay back in Rushville and got a job at the Philco division of the Motor Ford Company. And she worked there and made money until a union strike temporarily shut it down. Now, this union strike, it wasn't permanent, but it would take a minute to open back up. And while it was shutting down, the employees weren't making money. That means Carol had to find a new job somewhere else. So she eventually found another job as a door-to-door saleswoman selling encyclopedias for colliers. Now, in September 1968, Carol and some of her coworkers were supposed to be going down to Martinsville, Indiana, to do this job. But the thing is, Martinsville isn't exactly a good city, unlike Rushville. Martinsville, back then, was a sundown town. And if you don't know what that means, it means that black people were not allowed to be outside of their homes or live there safely after sundown, hence the name. There were towns that were started in like the late 19th century, like the early 20th. And it was a means for white people to keep the segregation and not allow the black people to live peacefully. And there would be signs at the city limits that said stuff like, "Nigger, don't let the sun get down on you over here." Or, "Welcome to Sundowners, a neighborhood watch community. We want white tents in our white community." Yeah, I think you get the point. And on September 16th, 1968, Carol Jenkins, along with 3 coworkers, 2 white men and 1 black woman, were set to go there. Now, Carol was afraid to go to Martinsville because of the horror stories that she heard. For example, when her dad or stepdad, Paul Davis, and his friend were playing basketball there, they would get harassed by like other players in the audience and stuff. And it was made clear that Martinsville was not the place you wanted to go to if you were black. But the thing is, Carol didn't want to tell her employers that she was scared to go. because she wanted to look like she was dedicated, and that meant taking on this role, going down to Martinsville to sell the encyclopedias. Now, her parents, Elizabeth and Paul, had no idea she was going to go there, and if they'd known, they would have never let her go. Yeah, but in the evening of September 16th, Carol and her 3 co-workers went down to Martinsville, and they had this plan that they would split up all around town and go door to door. And that night, they're going to meet up at like a gas station or something, or some meeting point where they would leave. So once they got there, they all split up. Carol started making her way down to her next house. But when she was doing that, our car pulled up yelling, just yelling stuff at her, like sexual stuff. And then when she wasn't paying them any attention, it turned to racist stuff, like racial slurs. And they were following her and chasing her. And Carol was freaking out, and she decided that the next house that she's going to go to, she's going to try to take refuge. So the house that she got to was the house of a white couple named Don and Norman Neal. She knocked on the door and was like, "Please help me, or please let me in. I've got somebody following me." And now the Neals allowed her in. And I want to mention this. On this day, Carol was wearing a brown wool coat, a white turtleneck, olive green pants, and a yellow scarf. Now remember that, because it's going to be really important later. So Carol's put in a situation about how these men in the car were following her, and then Don Neal went outside to look for this car and look for license plate number. And I think he found it, but that they drove away before he could get all the information. So while staying with the Neals, they called the police on Carol's behalf. And I think it was like one police officer that came to the house where Carol gave a very vague description of like what the men looked like and what the car looked like. So where the officer went over to them, actually found them, and was like, "Hey, were you following this woman?" And they admitted they're like, "Yeah, we did." And the officer does nothing with that information. He's like, "Okay, just don't let me catch you bothering this woman." And that's all that happened. Like, are you serious? These 2 men just admitted to your face that they were following and harassing a woman, and then you just let them go. Like, no arrest or nothing. But this is a sundown town in 1968. Of course that would happen. So when Carol explained to the Neals that she was a door-to-door saleswoman and was trying to meet up with the co-workers, Norma and Carol would walk several blocks, see if they could find the co-workers, but they didn't. So they came back to the house, and where Donna and Norma told Carol that she'd be welcome to stay with them. And then she appreciated the offer, but she declined it because she didn't want to be a burden onto them. And she thought it would probably be impolite to overstay her welcome, that she would stay too long. So she thanked them for it, but was getting ready to go to the meeting point on her own because she was just trying to get home that night. Now come after she left the house and walked to the meeting point near a gas station, I think, a car sped up with 2 white men, jumped out, and started running up to her. And she was freaking out. She's running away from them, but they caught up to her in no time. One of the men grabbed her, and the other man pulled out a screwdriver and stabbed her in the chest with it before running. Now Carol tried to pull herself up to refuge, but to no avail. She ended up passing out on the side of the road. And to where a teenage boy saw her, went into a restaurant to call the police. And then when the police came, Like, they saw her, but they didn't know exactly what was going on. But seeing that she wasn't responsive, they called an ambulance to take her to the hospital. And this whole time, she was alive, just not responsive. And then she died at the hospital. Now, they don't know why she passed out or anything. But when they were about to do the autopsy and they took her coat off, and that's when they saw the stab wound. And her sweater was soaked in blood. But it was also a very small and narrow wound that they couldn't tell exactly how she got it. So now they knew that it was like a murder thing, and her case made national news in newspapers. But there just wasn't much information to go off of because like they won't know witnesses or nothing. And also, any evidence that could be presented was contaminated because when they were taking her body to the hospital, the police did not close off the crime scene. And also, when they did talk about it, and like the papers and stuff, instead of calling her by name, they referred to her as the nigger girl. I can't make this up. They're that racist that when they find out that a black woman was murdered, they just call her the nigger girl instead of her name. Like what the hell is wrong with y'all? This is insane. Even her dad, Paul Davis, said, "I felt because she was a black girl, nobody did anything." And I don't disagree with that, because had this been a white woman that was found dead on the side of the road and murdered, then they would have took it more seriously. Like, the family kept trying to get justice for Carol, but the police wasn't taking it seriously, and they just didn't see it as worth their time. So the case went cold, and right now it looked like that they were never going to get justice for Carol. Now, about 30 years later, in like 1998, 99, late 90s, Carol's siblings had talked about it, and one of them had a suspicion that they knew who did it. So they tried to get justice again, but they just were back at square one. Like, they couldn't find much evidence because they believed that the murder weapon might have been a chisel hidden somewhere, but it clearly wasn't. It didn't lead to any evidence. And yeah, it just was still unsolved. Now I know that's a dead end right there. It sounds like a dead end. But get this. In June 2000, Carol's mom, Elizabeth, got a phone call from an anonymous woman that didn't give over their name or information, but she said that her dad killed Carol before hanging up. And about a year later, in November 2001, Indiana police got a letter that said the same thing, that my dad killed Carol. When you put this information together, they're starting to now take it seriously because, mind you, this isn't 1968 anymore. This is late 90s and early 2000s, so the police were willing to take it much more seriously than before. And in the letter, they even named the killer Kenneth Clay Richmond, somebody who was never brought up before or never looked into. And this is how it went. So, the night Carol was murdered, September 16th, 1968, Kenneth Clay, his friend, and his 7-year-old daughter, Shirley, were in a car. And they saw Carol. And this takes place after she left the Neal's house, to where they sped up behind her. And while Shirley stayed in the back seat, like Kenneth and his friend, that's when they went ahead and attacked Carol. One of them grabbed her by the arms from behind, and then Kenneth stabbed her in the chest with a screwdriver. And they got back in the car, laughing and joking about how she got what she deserved. Wow. Shirley witnessed the whole entire thing, and how she saw Carol pass out when they were leaving. Now, Kenneth offered Shirley $7 not to tell nobody, $1 for each year that she's been alive. And $7 back in the 60s was the equivalent to like $60 now. So this is a lot of money for a 7-year-old. But then years down the line, Shirley had confided in her sister-in-law / best friend Connie about it, and this led to Connie doing the phone call and the letter. So Connie did give this information instead of Shirley directly, and this finally gave the police the information that they needed to finally solve the case. And on May 8th, 2002, at 70 years old, Kenneth Clay Richmond was arrested for the murder of Carol Jenkins. Now, the thing is, he was living in a nursing home with terminal cancer. So he was fit, like not competent to stand trial. But he was still kept in police custody, I believe. And on August 31st, 2002, he died. So that means like he was never given a trial, found guilty, and sentenced to prison for killing Carol. If you think that's bad, then the man in the car with him has never been identified because Shirley didn't know who he was. And Kenneth wasn't given his name either when he was still alive. So they never found out who that other murder accomplice was. So he got away with this for his whole life. Yeah, so by the time they finally got the information, it was too late. And nobody could be properly, convicted for it. And I also want to mention this. Way back when the case started, when people found out about Don and Norma letting Carol in their house, trying to protect her, the Martinsville residents were so pissed off at them, harassing them and threatening them, because it's sundown town. That's against the rules. But Don and Norma maintained that they weren't wrong, that they were in the right. And they also tried to fight for justice for Carol after she died. And even just 10 years ago, back in 2014, Don and Norma proposed that a monument in Martinsville would be made in Carol's memory. And it was about to go into production. But the county commissioner had canceled it because he started getting flack about it. And now that I think about it, maybe that shouldn't be where Carol's monument or memorial should be. Because if you're going to set up something for her, you should do it in like Rushville, her hometown, where it would be safe and respected and not destroyed. Because every time they put up a marker for Emmett Till's murder, it keeps getting shot up and messed with, and they keep having to replace it. So yeah, they probably shouldn't do it in Martinsville for her. And this was 2014, like just 10 years ago, and people are still pressed about that. But on November 1st, 2017, a community park in Rushville was rededicated and named after her. And it is called the Carol Jenkins Davis Park. And there's also a memory stone in the garden of Martinsville City Hall. Well, for her, that was put up a day after the park. And Rushville High School even has something dedicated to her. So she did get her memorial stuff. Was like she has a park and two different ones, one at her old school and one at Martinsville City Hall. So that was my true crime podcast about Carol Jenkins. If you liked it, go ahead and like and subscribe. It's a free way to help me out. And hit the notification bell so YouTube will notify you whenever I post a video. And I'll see you next video. Bye.